Some content or topics discussed could trigger a past anxiety or be sensitive or disturbing to listen to or view. Please view and listen with caution. Hi, my name is Todd Blyleven. I'm one of the hosts of the Walking Tall podcast, and it's our mission to help all people that are down and depressed or dealing with some sort of trauma or mental health issue to learn how to stand back up and walk tall again in their lives. Please follow us on all of our social platforms, our YouTube channel, and check out our Walking Tall movement at www.walkingtallmovement.com. Now, here's our show.
Welcome back once again to Walking Tall. And if you heard us last week, I have to say telling my story was tough and it really impacted me, but it also healed me and showed me my own strength. And if you didn't hear, that was the first time since the 4th of July that I've told my story. And hearing it, Todd, how did you think I did?
Well, I mean, Chris, going through something like that and talking about your story, I know that was so challenging for you, and I thought you did an amazing job. I know after the show you were a little worried about how you spoke about things, and I thought it was very professional. I thought it was very respectful, and really, just like I've said before, just the fact that you kept moving from the minute that incident happened till the very end, until you had your breakdown, you were helping people and you were walking tall. And man, I'm even more proud of you after hearing your story. So it was really cool.
Yeah, you're right. When we did get done filming the show, I said to both you and Dr. LaRosa, like, man, that sucked. I felt terrible. And the reason why I felt terrible, honestly, Todd, was because I was so proud and so impressed with the week before and how well I felt you handled yourself and how articulate you were. And just listening to myself as I was speaking last week, I felt so discombobulated and so disorganized. And that was why I was overly critical. And partly of that is because I'm still discovering the events of that day. And so as I work through EMDR, I'm confident that I'll feel more organized in my conversations about my experience. But Dr. LaRosa, before we hear your story today, you want to just comment on last week's episode? How did hearing my story impact you, and what were some professional thoughts you were having as you were hearing my story?
Yeah. Well, part of what you just said, questioning yourself, wondering how you sounded, worrying about your ordering of events, all those different things, that's the vulnerability side of it. That's what makes this hard. That's what makes getting on something like this for however many people to see difficult and vulnerable, and you're doing that for yourself and for other people. So I wanted to point that out first and foremost. As you were going through your story, I saw your wheels turning. I saw your brain processing. I saw you going back to some of those events and trying to piece it together. And the interjection of real circumstances and impressions upon you that were made during that time period. I think I commented about this last week, where you just saw the beauty in people, in life, in others, in celebration, in us, as humans in this country. And for all the people that fought through COVID and are still fighting through COVID and really just want to get out there and have a good time with their families, you brought all that to life. You made me envision all of that happening, and that through all of that adversity and all of that pain and all of that fear, you brought those good things to the surface. So that was something I really wanted to impress upon you, that the ordering of events doesn't mean anything. It was your emotional connection, your vulnerability, and your willingness to share that with everybody. That is, it's just so admirable and impressive and brave.
Yeah, well, thank you. As I've said oftentimes, I have a good model. We have a good model on Walking Tall and Todd. And we're going to hear your story here shortly too, and you'll be another model for listeners. But I do want to say, I have gone back and listened to last week's episode a couple times, and I'll say, like, I realize my strength now to a degree, and the fact that I was able to get through last week's show, if you will, without emotion per se, because there were many times I wanted to break down, but I was able to will myself through it. and walk tall, if you will, for our listeners and for us as a group. So I want to just say to you both, thank you for listening. Thank you for your words of support and encouragement. And that's really what Walking Tall is about. We are a support group for ourselves and for others and listeners. So, and that's just us being the example. So thank you both. But now it's not about me and it's not about Todd. It's about you, Dr. LaRosa. And I want to say, as both Todd and I and our listeners have gotten to know you, and personally, Todd and I could say I understand how difficult today is going to be for you. You're one of the more humble people and more impressive people I've met in my time, particularly in the mental health space. And I know with certainty you don't like to bring attention to yourself. And Todd, you could certainly attest to, we joke with Vanetta and call her the doctor of all knowing, or a world renowned doctor of psychology. And she tells us, guys, no, I'm not world renowned. Like, but really, and we said it last week, we mean it. You're our world renowned. And we are just so happy to have you. And we're going to talk today finally about how we all met at the end of the show. But Todd, you want to just say a few words about Dr. LaRosa before we turn it over to her and hear her amazing story?
Yeah, I well, you said it all, really, Chris. And I think having somebody with her expertise, just the person she is, you've given so much already to probably thousands of people, indirectly and directly. And I think what our listeners have an opportunity to really get into the mindset of where you're at with your life, the experiences you've had, and everything you bring to this trio, and then society. I think I'm so excited for people as we start to grow this to just listen to you and your special kind of way of being able to present things. It's helped me get through my story. It helped Chris. We're going to help you today as much as we could. You know, Chris and I are like the two dancing fools on the side of the show.
Spotlight's off us, baby.
Yeah. So all about you, Dr. LaRosa. Awesome.
So, Dr. LaRosa, you want to talk to us and our listeners and tell the world how Dr. Vanetta LaRosa came to be?
Well, I started to share my story during our first podcast of how this journey began as a child, and I left it off where I was in my PhD program learning from that wonderful Dr. Barbara Cordoni about psychoeducational assessments and helping people who have learning disabilities and the self-confidence and self-esteem issues that people with those disabilities have, and how I very, very much enjoy psychoeducational testing and I love all that. And then, after that, I came back to New York. Probably, I guess it was about 1999, 90, something like that. And I was living in Carbondale, Illinois, for a while during the doctorate, and then I came back, and it was not an easy time for me because my dad got sick, and I'll get into that story a little bit later. But I came back here and I began a variety of jobs. I was consulting, I was testing, I was counseling victims of domestic violence. I was just working any job in this field, any and all that I could find, because my level of interest never has stopped. It still doesn't stop. There's not a population or a group of people that I haven't worked with. From chemically dependent, mentally ill people, senior citizens with intellectual disability, babies with neurodevelopmental disabilities, everything in between. So I just was working, and at this time, I was considered all but dissertation at this time. So I came back to New York. I finished everything I needed to do. The only thing I had to do was finish my research. And I was completing that research at a place that I was working at the time, St. Christopher Ottilie, which is a nonprofit for a variety of children and individuals from foster care with, a variety of disabilities. It's a wonderful place. And I was sort of like a resident staff psychology, person. I used to run different groups, and I used to provide counseling and behavior programming and staff training and, all this kind of stuff. And that's where I finished my research. But I had a little bit of a time delay in there because my dad got sick. And again, I'll go into that story a little bit later. But ultimately, I finished my PhD and I had my first son, Vito. And I continued taking every case that ever came to me for anyone in need. I used to travel to the Bronx. I live along, Long Island. That's pretty far from me. I used to have a client that was a very big individual. Looks like he was born to play in the NFL, if he wasn't born with autism. And he had some pretty severe behaviors, and which led to aggression and some people getting seriously hurt. And I was called in to help him. And I was terrified, my knees were shaking, and I've been crisis trained. I have all the training. I have training, to keep myself and others physically safe. I have de-escalation training. I have everything, but I was scared, and so I approached the situation. I remember he had the reach of like George Foreman as well. So, if you were around him in any way, he wanted to hit you, that was it. So I just remember, relying on the science, behavior analysis. What was I taught? What did I analyze? What could I ascertain? This individual had OCD as a component, running through his behaviors. And if he was prevented from doing a particular thing, like picking up tiny pieces of paper from, all over the school, he would, he'd run you down like a linebacker in order to get what he needed. So it was really a fine balance of keeping everybody safe and trying to figure out how we can teach this individual some life skills that will enable him to kind of get out in the world and not have to be so isolated, because people were scared of him, So that's just an example of a case that I took on. So there wasn't a case that was offered to me that I didn't take on. I wanted to find a way to help everybody, regardless of how scared I was, regardless of, the travel time. I lost money on a variety of these cases. I mean, I would spend 4 or 5 hours traveling only to work too, and that's not to mention all the data analysis and programming I did behind the scenes. But I have a sort of an obsessive brain as well, little ADHD too. When I get locked on something, I can't end it until I honestly feel as if I have a plan on paper that's doable for everyone around, that's actually going to help that person. So that person lives in my plans. Everything that I write, unless it's perfect in my mind and all the dots are connected, I can't release it. That's my own issue, so I would spend sometimes 30 hours, on a behavior plan before, training the staff and the families on how to implement it. And I really just used all of my training and knowledge and skills, one client at a time, to help them. Again, this was after my dad's, stuff was going on, and I threw myself into work, and I was working like 80 hours a week or more. I was 7 days a week. And I remember I was going on like my 8th or 9th week of this, and I just broke down. I said, I didn't have children yet. Of course, I couldn't possibly with working that much and, doing all that.
Sure.
But I broke down. I said, I need a break. I just need a break. So I started to give myself maybe a couple of days off here and there. But it was a time in my life where I had to learn to put up boundaries. I had to understand that if parents call needing to talk or needing information, I didn't have to spend 2 hours on the phone each and every time. I couldn't fix the world, and although I did my best, I had to learn those boundaries, and I had to learn a little bit of that self-care so that I could continue, doing the stuff that I did, and I used to provide counseling in a variety of group homes all over the boroughs of New York, where I would travel, and the histories, the stories, the experiences, the behavior, and all of the stuff that I had seen and heard and dealt with. It was a lot. It was a lot to balance. It was a lot because I wanted so badly to make a difference. And some of these kids were just so hurt. They had, they had histories that are just unbelievable and unimaginable to most people. And what could I do in the 45 minutes, 3 times a week that I was delegated, to meet with them? I did everything I could possibly do. And I put my life into all of those experiences, all those years. Eventually because in 2000, I think it was 2003. Wow, I can't remember that. My memory does start to go a little bit here sometimes, and I'll explain why a little bit. But I became a board certified behavior analyst in the state of New York. There wasn't really that many of us at the time, and I had this enormous caseload that was continuing to grow. So I decided to start to train people. People were looking for supervision, they were looking for support, and I never wanted to turn down a case. I couldn't work anymore. So my way of extending my skills and my passion was to train others. They would then, when I felt comfortable with them, take over some of my cases. I would supervise them. And this continued on until I developed Helping Hands Children's Services in 2004, which was my company. So that company grew, and eventually we were working with about 70 school districts on Long Island, and over 150 employees, hundreds of kids. And it just, this didn't happen overnight, obviously, but I would take on a school district myself. I would work really hard. I would become familiar with the special education director, some wonderful people who have now retired, that just brilliant all around, who I had the pleasure to work with and learn from. And I was there to support the students in their school and the families in their school, and they felt comfortable with me. So then when they had additional students that needed help, I was able to place the people that I had trained into those roles, and Helping Hands grew and grew. And I was the sole owner and founder of this company. I had fabulous people, wonderful clinicians, all these years that have worked with me. I don't say for me, I say with me, because we've always been a team. We've always worked together. And then in 2019, I sold the company. I started to get a lot of interest from various private equity firms, because autism services in the behavioral health field has become quite popular. And when I had my first few set of phone calls, and let's have lunch and let's have dinner and let me ask you some questions, and it was like 5 or 6 hours of my time. And I found that it was more of an information gathering session, where I was just being used for information. And what about this? And what do you find about that? And how do you feel about this? And what would you do about that? And here I was just advising and consulting people, which I love to do. But I realized at a certain point in time from those people that the only value in my company at the end of the day for them was the dollar amount, and how quickly they could grow it. And I wasn't willing to do that, because clinical quality is everything to me. And I didn't have marketing, and I didn't have anything. I just had word of mouth. I had parents that knew what a great job that we did. I had people that believed in us, and I had organic growth simply by the work that we did and the kids that we helped. And I never wanted that to change. And then I found this really amazing group called Zenith Partners, and they were very different. The owner, Rob, came from a healthcare family. His sister is, and now she's world renowned. She's a famous.
You're world renowned.
In your world, in our world. Fantastic. She's a brilliant woman with amazing leadership skills, and hopefully someday she'll come on the podcast and talk with us. But so he came from this great background. He had a real understanding of what this field means and what it should mean. And once I met him, and I met Andrew, who was their vice president at the time. Now he's our CFO. I really knew that these people wanted to do the right thing. And I started the company in 2004. And, I am not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer. I had to have consultation from all these different people and learn all these things over the years. Not my passion. I learned it for the business so that I could have a healthy business and do all the right things, but nothing I was really interested in doing. And so it's a lot when you have a company that kind of keeps growing and you're by yourself, and I was such a clinical person that's kind of how I always led everything. I felt like it was a really good time, to take this chance and see what they could do with the company that I started. And, they rebranded. It's still called Helping Hands, but now it's Helping Hands Family. And it's now, they have clinics in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland. And it's fabulous. I mean, the team of people, they're just fabulous. There's even more good people. that I know now. New York is still operating. I'm still running New York, but with all of their wonderful support. And it's been a beautiful journey, a wonderful ride. You know, somewhere in the process of this in 2014, I went back to school to get a postdoctorate in clinical neuropsychology. And again, I started the first show telling you how much I love neuropsychology and how I worked in a lab as an undergraduate at Stony Brook. And it's something I wanted to complete and I wanted to finish, because psychoeducational batteries and educational psychology was something I was trained so well and I was so passionate about. I wanted to do the same for neuropsychological assessment so that I could bring it all together. I could understand the brain dysfunction and also the educational dysfunction, put it all together, understand the behavioral side of things with the board certification I have in behavior analysis, and really fuse those things together to help people the best way that I possibly knew how. And that was just a beautiful, I have no words to tell you how amazing that was. I mean, we went to the city and we met with Dr. Elkanon Goldberg, who if there's a universe renowned, then he should have that. Because the level of genius and expertise and wonderment that I sat through each and every week, there's no price tag that, you know, that could signify that. It was just I'm so grateful for that educational experience and for having the opportunity to learn under him and to do that. And I finished that in 2016. And
Here you are. And here you are. You know, there's a few things, Dr. LaRosa, that stood out significantly to me hearing your story of tenacity is how I'll call your story, right? You know how we feel about your presence on this podcast, but I think you just showed listeners your tenacity, your drive, your willpower to help others. But the two things that stood out to me, above all else, first off, you may not realize it, but with Helping Hands, no different than our intention with Walking Tall, you actually started a movement. Helping Hands was a movement, and it started in New York. And then you just said it very clearly. It moved to Pennsylvania and Connecticut and all these other states in the Northeast. And you should be extremely, extremely proud of yourself. And I'm extremely proud to call you a teammate, as I know Todd is as well. The second thing that stood out is your lack of ability to say no to anything. And there's nothing more proof positive of that than when we approached you for this podcast. If listeners can't understand, and as Todd and I know very well, you're a busy person. You have a lot of people to help and a lot of missions to meet and a lot of expectations of you as a professional. And when we approached you about Walking Tall on this podcast, you couldn't have said yes quick enough. And that just goes to show our listeners your true values as a person and helping people. And that's what we're all about here on Walking Tall. And I just know with certainty that's exactly who you are, which makes you the perfect partner in this. So thank you. But Todd, obviously you knew Dr. LaRosa a little bit longer than I have. I'm sure you've heard some new things. How are you feeling now knowing Dr. LaRosa a little bit more intimately? You're muted.
See, there you go. Real live time right there,
That's
everybody.
it.
On Zoom. We've all been there. Be in our board meeting. You muted. No, it perfectly makes sense with just what you've done and who you are as a person. What I find really fascinating is coming from an athlete standpoint, you know, you have an end goal, you're doing everything you can, you're putting all the pieces together, you're training, you're working on your mental side, you're out on the mound and you're pitching, and there's this whole process to it, and you get the joy and satisfaction of that win, right? And for you, like, there was no stopping you to get to your final goal and whatever that was in your life at that moment. And so the adversity that you put forth is awesome. I mean, it's so in line with, I think, my personality, Chris's personality, and it's what we strive for. The one thing I always find fascinating is, how did you juggle all of that? How did you stay focused and you know, just kind of separate your tasks to like keep getting all these wins? That, to me, because we all get flustered in life, you know,
Sure.
and how much opportunity there is sometimes, but you like just you went and did it.
It's funny you ask because if I'm nothing else, I'm resourceful. I will find a way to accomplish whatever it is that I am passionate to do. And I joke about this, but it is true. I do have a little ADD, and my brain is always, I have compartments going at all times of the thing, and it stimulates me. It actually inspires me. And there's a lot of work, around understanding a little bit of, an ADD brain, that's necessary. But once you do and you're able to work with it, I think it's a truly productive thing that, depending on the level that you have and the type and all that kind of stuff, but can certainly be helpful. And and you say, my perseverance and all, but I think back, I had a flashback. Here I go with the long-term memory being a vast warehouse, right? So I had a flashback of, I have, at the same time in 2004, I developed a little nonprofit as well, which,
Oh, nothing. That she just developed a little nonprofit. No big deal.
I mean, that's what you do.
Yeah, who wouldn't, right? Like,
Right.
yeah.
a small one. We never made any money, but it was wonderful because I didn't have any staff. I had about 6 or 7 kids that were really, really needy, pretty significant disabilities, and I didn't have staff. I had my husband, my mother-in-law, a couple of friends, a couple of parents, a couple of people that just wanted to volunteer. And everybody came together in a space that was borrowed. And for a full day, this was a full day socialization program. We worked with these kids because my goal at that time was to have a social recreational environment for kids with the most severe disabilities, because they didn't really have that opportunity, without one-to-one support and without significant help. It just wasn't possible for them, to go out and this was just so wonderful over time. I had an amazing art therapist that came in and did some work. We had volunteers from libraries. We had some pet therapy. We had arts and crafts. We had a wonderful agency called Family Residences and Essential Enterprises, Free Inc., who, speaking of walking tall, when I tell you about them, you're just going to light up. They do such amazing, wonderful things for adults with disabilities. They supported my program, and I just had so much love and so much support from the community to do this. And I look back and all I see are friends and family and people that donated their time and space. And, it's just, that's how I did it. I kind of lived off the love and support of others to keep going.
Sure. And you are still going, not only as a professional, but also as a person. I think, for those who have been listening to us, for the first few weeks, you've made yourself vulnerable, not only as a professional, but as a mother and as a human. You've discussed several occasions, things you're encountering, not as a doctor, not as a doctor of psychology or what have you, but just as a simple person. And what I'll say, and Todd and I have had conversations about this, personally, in my experience, getting to know more about mental health and working with professionals and learning about the industry. One of the things that is alarming to me is the shortage of professionals, doctors, therapists, psychologists, things like that. And as I start to read articles and read blogs, it's alarming the rate at which professionals like yourself, Dr. LaRosa, are getting burnt out because of this mental health crisis or epidemic or pandemic, whatever you want to call it. And so what I'm very excited to hear about in the next part of today's show is the difference, right? We know now, it's established who Dr. Vanetta LaRosa is and the amazing accolades you've encountered and taken upon. But what I'm even more so excited about for you, for us and our listeners, is to hear about Vanetta LaRosa, the person, and how you've overcome adversity in your life. You've mentioned earlier, as you started in your professional career, your father's illness and things of that sort. And I know you're going to get ready to tell a couple stories of adversity and how you've overcome it as an example of walking tall. But what I want to say for those listening to us that are professionals like yourself, we're a team. And folks like Todd and I that are suffering and have issues, and professionals like yourselves who have trained and educated yourselves for this moment. We're a team and we work together and we have to do so. And so it's even more important for us to have a professional like yourself as a person on this show, so we can all be vulnerable and we can all express our circumstances in a different light. And having a professional like you is just amazing. And so I want you to know that we recognize the difference between Dr. Vanetta LaRosa and Vanetta LaRosa. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to you. You could tell a few stories of adversity and how you've overcome it. And I'm really excited to hear these as well.
Well, that feels good. You know, Vanetta the person, Vanetta the professional. You know, we're all people, you know, people first, and we all have demons and we all have issues and we all have weaknesses and we all have vulnerabilities and insecurities. And, you know, the one thing that I'm trying really hard to do, because I believe so much in it, is to be vulnerable, you know, not try to be perfect. You know, I'm so used to getting the job done, you know, no boundaries, working through whatever it is that's going on to reach that end goal, being driven. You know, my dad was a really smart guy who met my mom at a difficult time in her life and gave up his education and, you know, his dreams to use his time in the Air Force to take a civil service job so that he could pay the bills and, you know, help to support and all that before they had me. And looking at his hardworking life, he was a mailman. He was a letter carrier, and he was the kind of guy that loved Native American history. He loved the Civil War. He loved reading. He was an avid reader. He'd read huge volumes of things and just be able to sit there and tell you all about it. And he was
So that's where you get it from. That's where you get it from.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
He just would go through these. He's a speed reader. He would just go through these books. And, you know, when I was in high school, I wasn't a serious student in high school. I was a serious, let's hang out with your friends, you know, make them laugh in class kind of kid. Cause I, you know, was still overcoming my own ADHD. But, you know, I looked at everything he used to read and I'd be like, how did you read that so fast that you can't possibly know anything that's in that book? And then he would tell me the whole story. I mean, it was amazing. You know, so I'm an only child. I do have some half siblings, but I'm an only child. I consider myself. And I grew up loving sports because of him. You know, Giants, Yankees, Rangers, all the way. I don't know, we're going to lose some listeners here, but I'm kidding.
Blackhawks.
And, you know, he taught me all about sports really early in life. I understand the full game of football, baseball, hockey, everything. And I loved all of it so much. He taught me how to play baseball when I was a little girl. And I used to play stickball with the boys, baseball with the boys. And I'm telling you, I used to kill them. I used to beat every single one of them. And I every day.
What a shock.
I know. Yeah.
Like came home, you know, every day. Did you beat them? Did you hit a home run? You know, and this is a little Italian family, you know, and I did. But then, of course, you know, everybody hit 12 and that was the end of that. And, you know, the boys grew bigger, stronger, faster. And, you know, and I couldn't keep up, but my love of the game never ended. I was a failure in softball, so that wasn't good. But I went over to gymnastics and running and all kinds of things like that. But, you know, my father and I would watch the Giants and football games every single Sunday. In our household, we watch every single Yankee game the entire season. And there was many times in high school that I would forego a party or an event to stay home with my dad and watch these events. You know, we just enjoyed it so much. And he used to get so mad. I bought him this Giants doll at the time that was attached by Velcro so he could rip the head and arms off and throw it at the TV. So yeah,
That's awesome.
This is awesome.
He's also really a fast guy, and he used to race me all the time when I was little, and he used to beat me. And then at a certain point I beat him, and, you know, we had a lot of fun together. You know, we had a lot of fun. And I think I was about maybe close to 30 at the time. And I took a trip with my husband and my brother-in-law and his wife at the time to Las Vegas. Now, this was kind of around the time that I told you I was working like crazy and, doing a lot of stuff. And I just needed a break, right? So we said, all right, let's just be young, go to Vegas, have some fun. We went, we got there, we basically unloaded in the hotel, about to go out and have some fun. And my parents called me and said, we have something to tell you, and we're really sorry to have to say this now, but it's at a point where we can't wait anymore. And I said, what are you talking about? And that was the information that my dad had lung cancer and had a few months to live.
Wow.
Sorry.
So I broke down, of course, and my first steps were, how do you know? What did the scan show? What are the credentials of the doctor? How long has this been going on? What are your symptoms? And here I am jumping into fix mode, to get a handle on this. I couldn't handle the emotional toll. I called the doctor and I verified the fact, and I forced him to tell me that my father was basically ready for hospice at that point. So I packed up and we drove from Las Vegas to Arizona because my parents retired to Arizona, a town called Cottonwood, kind of near Sedona at the time. That was their dream, to live out west. So we drove there and I saw my dad's condition and I saw him throwing up blood. I saw him weak. I saw a lot of stuff. So I pretty much spend the next 48 hours researching, reading medical journal articles, learning about lung cancer, learning about the type of lung cancer that he had. And I found a variety of clinical trials. One particular clinical trial was in Great Neck, Long Island, that involved an experimental drug at the time called Tarseva, which was kind of like reprogramming healthy cells in a person's body. So I convinced my father to come and live with me on Long Island and give this a shot. And he was accepted into the study. It was the type of study where I'm not going to get into scientific terms, but basically they don't want the patient to know whether they're receiving the treatment or not. So it was it was concealed from him whether he was getting a placebo or the actual medication. And I wanted to know. So I looked up the side effects of this potential medication. One of it was breakout, like acne breakout, and he started to actually break out. And I was so happy. I said, that means
I can imagine
you're getting the drug, So it wasn't drug or nothing. It was drug plus standard chemo or standard chemo plus placebo. So there wasn't getting anything, so I figured the risk was worth the potential reward. And it was. I mean, he stayed with me at that time, and I just remember, my dad losing all his hair, getting really skinny, vomiting, spending a lot of time freezing and shivering in bed in my guest room, but he was there. He was there to play with my dog at the time. He was there, my mom was in Arizona. She came to, spend some periods of time with us as well during the process. But I saw what he went through and I saw how hard he fought, and he didn't want to die. He was in his 50s, he died at 61. So, he wanted to see his grandchildren someday, which he never did. He had a lot of reasons to live. He wanted to live. So anyway, the Tarseva worked, and where he had tumors all over his chest, mediastinum, they couldn't even take out the tumors. There were so many in his midsection. It was just inoperable. And by the time he finished, some of this treatment, I think it was about 6 months in, his CT scans showed absolutely nothing. His tumors were gone. And we all felt elated. We felt, oh my God, he has a second chance at life. This is a miracle. It was fantastic. It was wonderful. He ended that phase of the study and he went back to Arizona, and there was a clinic there that was supposed to be keeping up with the treatments and whatever the dosage recommendations were of this new drug. So they titrated the medication, they reduced it. And after a period of time, the cancer started to come back. It started to come back, and his symptoms, started to come back, and he just deteriorated, from there. So I went out there to visit a few times, came back. The last time I was there, he was really weak. I remember driving him to his radiation treatments and, spending time. My father was really funny too, something I did not inherit. He could be out of anything. He was always funny, always made people laugh. Every minute that you see him was fun because he was just a fun guy, really funny guy. And we were driving to his radiation treatment and I was speeding. Sorry. And I was pulled over, and my dad got out of the car, went over to the cop, and he was such a friendly guy. He leaned on the car, and he said, "This is my daughter, she's driving me to my cancer treatment. Can you help us out?" kind of thing. And of course he let us go, but that's just how he was. Like, we'd pull into a gas station, he jumps out, he pumps the gas, he meets me at the airport. He knows I love Starbucks. He'll walk 20 minutes to get me a Starbucks and, have me wait there with my luggage. Just just a real daddy daughter bond, that we always had,
I
So-
love it. And
Man.
Vanetta, hearing that, it just makes my heart so big. Hearing that relationship you had with your father. Todd and I both have daughters ourselves, and I strive, even though she's, as I say, 8 going on 18 and wants nothing to do with dad right now. I strive to have that relationship, as I know you do with your daughter Gracie, Todd. But I couldn't help but think, and listeners have heard Todd's and my stories, if they've been listening to the show, and as hard as that was to tell, in many ways, those were strangers, right? Or not people that we grew up loving and knowing intimately. And just to hear your strength, telling your story about the relationship you have with your dad, and what stood out above all else, as soon as you found his diagnosis, you didn't turn into a puddle, as we've called it. You went right to a book, and you walked tall for your dad, and you extended his life by finding this drug. And had you not done that, who knows what his fate would have been. And I know he's looking down on you right now with gratitude, having done what you did to help his life be better for as long as he could be on this earth. So congrats to you for walking tall for your dad. And
I just finished
go
with
ahead.
one
No, I
thing.
know. Yeah.
Just tie it up because I don't want to leave it out there
Yeah.
thinking that it was,
Yeah.
that it ended the way it was. It didn't really end, as pretty as I'm making it sound. I did struggle, through all this. I just tried to
Of course.
the last time I went to visit him, and he was weak like this, I remember on the plane coming home, I just cried the entire time because I knew he was dying. And there were people on the plane, next to me saying, "Are you okay? What happened?" I couldn't even speak. The only thing I said to some lady was, "My dad's dying." But the fact that she asked really meant something to me. It meant something to me on a level that I'll always remember. Then the final time was when my mom called and said, "That's it. It's imminent. You have to come back." And so at the time, my grandmother, I told you in the last show, was my best friend, right? She was in her mid to late 80s, and she was pretty much blind and she couldn't walk. And from New York to Arizona, we all went, my husband, my grandmother, and myself, which is a really long trip for an old lady with those ailments, who refused a wheelchair, by the way, because she said she did not need one, and embarrass her that way. So, so she walked with cane in hand, the whole entire airport, until we got through security, and she had orthotic shoes and, everything else. And, imagine being a mother going on a trip like this to say goodbye to your son. This is all I could think about, was what my grandmother was going through, and that I was going to say goodbye to my father, So we went, and, we got there, and he was, he's pretty much in hospice at that time at home. And he was, he was comatose, mostly. And I remember getting there, and I remember that I was there maybe a day or two, and it was Sunday, and the Giants were on, and he insisted upon getting out of bed to sit in his chair to watch the Giants with me. He wasn't awake for more than maybe just a couple of plays. But that was the last time,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
that we
sorry.
Wow.
did that,
So
and then
sorry.
thank you.
Yeah, Vanetta, yeah,
Just
we're so sorry. And I apologize for cutting your story off. But yeah, your strength is evident. Your love for your father, your love for all of humanity, frankly. Hearing your stories as a professional, as a person, is evident. And Todd, you've known that longer than I have. How are you feeling for Vanetta, hearing the story?
As a dad, it makes me just want to be as good as I can possibly be to have that relationship that your dad had with you. I mean, that's the Cinderella story, I think, of every father's wish, is to have that bond and that love. Oh my God. Like, I wish I could have shaken, I would have been honored to shake your dad's hand and just be in his presence. I mean, it sounds like literally a true hero of men, and just be able to really stand up and walk tall. And that's what he did for you. And that relationship, that's awesome, man. I mean, that's what you want, right? We all should fight to have that bond with our
Yeah.
kids, in life, society. The fact that your dad could go up and like lean over on a cop car and go, "Hey, come on now, let's give her a
Let's go.
break."
My daughter.
That's like true character,
how we
So
approached him too,
Yeah.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
now we know,
Awesome.
but now Vanetta, we know, I've always wondered where your love for sports came, and how that passion for the great game of baseball, as we've called it. And now I know where that came from, and it just makes so much more sense now. And it kind of, for me, puts a big bow on how we all met. Like, this is how it started, right? I kind of talked about my passion for baseball and having been a coach, and Todd talked about his passion for baseball, having been a scout and the son of a Hall of Famer, and you being the daughter of a sports fanatic, and now the mother of a young athlete. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Vanetta, to talk a little bit about how you found out about the Scout Hub and came to know Todd.
Well, first of all, you guys are like gods to me. I'm like an D1 coach, a former pro MLB player, scout. I mean, it's from the world that I'm in. And, my son has been playing baseball since he was like 18 months old. And, he started at 4 on real T-ball, and he's 16 now. And, he's really good. So my happy place, as I just said in my meeting this morning at work, is on the baseball field. I don't care if it's 7 o'clock in the morning and 20 degrees, I'll have 20 blankets on, and I'll sit there for a triple header and love every single second of it. I love watching him play. He's so extraordinarily athletic and fast, and such a really good teammate, that my life is really just been about baseball. So when I met the both of you, here I go with the New York accent. I just said
the Bodias.
Cambodia.
I just, your compliments and your world they're another segment of my being. And I know how hard it is to be seen by coaches and the whole college environment and stuff now, and everything my son's going through. And then I meet both of you who've been so extremely successful. And it's like, wow, people have no idea how hard that is at all. So I just had to point that out. So when I first met, I don't open up to people easily, especially people, I don't have your skill set. To me, you're in a different ballpark, literally. I said I wasn't funny, see?
You are funny.
Still not that funny. But I found the Scout Hub because I'm just looking for avenues to get. My son is a kid from New York, and he never really had a ton of people advocating to get him out there in the world. And he's extremely talented. He's extremely fast. He does things at a 15-year-old level, playing with kids 2 and 3 years older. and he's got like numbers and metrics all over the place. And I'm like, nobody even knows my son. And he really does have a dream to play baseball as long as he can. So I was always looking, people contact me all the time, contact him all the time, join this team, do this, have this or whatever. And we've done some of it. And the Scout Hub came my way, and I actually looked at it, and I was like, well, first of all, Todd's son is on it, who's so intimidating because he's so extremely talented. And I looked at that and I'm like, oh my God, like that's crazy. I don't know, if I should do this. But then I thought about my son's skills and everything that he has. And I'm like, he deserves to showcase these things because he's worked really hard. I mean, this kid works 24/7 on these things. And I couldn't get the darn thing I couldn't pay for it. I was hitting the button. It wouldn't work. I was getting frustrated, and I spent 45 straight minutes just trying to pay for it.
Fix that, Todd, would you? Let's go.
It's fixed. It's fixed.
I don't know, Todd, did I email you from it? Or I think I emailed you saying I can't pay for it. And then Todd responded back immediately and said, can I help you? Would you like to jump on a call? It was a Sunday. And I thought, is this real? Is this like a real thing? Like, how could a company actually offer to help you that quickly and care that much about the experience that you're having? So I got on the phone, and that was our first conversation. We talked for a really long time. You helped me through it. I told you all about Vito. And then you started to look at videos of Vito, and you said, yeah, I think you're onto something. I think the kid's pretty good, So that's how we met, and we kept talking. And then of course it came up what I did for a living. And because I said the Scout Hub is such an amazing platform, it should be used for X, Y, Z. And, there's the entrepreneurial things in my head going on. And then Todd, you were like, yeah, I've actually been doing, a lot of that stuff as it is. And, then we started talking about my background and some other, therapeutic adventures that, we'll talk about at some other point in time. And the relationship just grew from there. And then of course I learned, Todd, about your story. And, I really didn't know at first any of this. So, it was all just, as we said before, organic, and how we all learned about each other. And the more we learned about each other, the more respect and support we all had for each other. And not soon after that, Chris, Todd started to tell me about you and your background and everything that, that you accomplished and you've been through. And I thought to myself, wow, like this is just absolutely incredible that the universe has brought these two people into my life and me into their life. And I knew there had to be a deeper meaning and reason for all of it. So
as much as I talked to Todd before January 16th, I never knew you existed, Vanetta. And I referenced that text I sent to Todd that evening on January 16th at about 7:00. And it literally said like, hey man, have you ever thought about anything good coming from all this? And he said to me, yeah, all the time. What do you got? And so as the director of ideation, as Todd calls me, my thumb started going uber fast. And I started texting this whole diatribe, if you will, about what I thought he and I alone together could accomplish. And I didn't know about you yet. And so we got to talking about a few other things that we have passions for and helping people in other avenues aside from this podcast. And he told me about, oh, hey, I never told you, but I met this doctor and she's a world-renowned doctor of psychology. And I said, well, what are you waiting for? Why didn't you tell me about this? So Todd and mine's relationship started once again, because of the great game of baseball. During Todd's episode, I read a text message that he sent me on July 7th, introducing himself. And it referenced an individual by the name of Ryan Brownlee, who reached out to Todd and asked him to contact me. And that's the text Todd shared with listeners last week during my episode. But Ryan and I coached together for about 6 years at the University of Iowa. And as a matter of fact, when I was a senior, he was a first-year coach at Iowa. So he coached me for 1 year, and then we worked together for about 6 or 7. And as I was a young coach, I would babysit his newborns. He had a newborn son named Jackson, who I fell in love with. He called me Zuki. He couldn't say Maliszewski, so he said Zuki. But Ryan and I became very close, and I became close with his family. His father, Jim, was the head coach at Evansville and Illinois State for a long time. His brother, Tim, was an assistant coach, now owns a tournament company in the Midwest. But if not for Ryan Brownlee, I would have never known Todd Blyleven. And I met Ryan Brownlee through baseball. And so we've referenced a few times, if not for baseball, the three of us would have not come together. And that's absolutely true, because I've known Ryan through baseball coaching together. And that's how I met Todd. You met Todd through baseball and your son Vito. And it just happened so organically. And so as Todd and I were saying, like, well, we could do this or we could do that. And then a light bulb went off and it was like, how about a podcast? And well, I got this doctor in my, in my on my team. We might want to talk to her. And now I have we have what I feel like is just the perfect team to bring this mission to the world and to walk tall for ourselves and for others. And Todd, you're the glue, whether you realize it or not. If not for you, Vanetta and I wouldn't have met. You're the glue. So don't screw it up. No, just kidding.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, really. I just can't thank you enough, Todd, for making yourself vulnerable and extending yourself to Vanetta, and explaining to her who you are and your story, and then doing the same for me. Because if you not done that and walked tall for yourself, and for me, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you.
I mean, it's amazing. And number one, her son Vito really can play. So it's not
So if you're
just a
listening,
mom.
Scout.
Yeah, coming from a scout's perspective. I did a little video on him. It was funny because when you hear parents talk about their kids all the time, we all brag about our kids. We all like probably overinflate a little bit. But she sent me some videos and I'm like, man, this kid can really hit. He can really play. And he's an 8 runner. And in the baseball world, an 8 on a 2 scale, an 8 is outstanding. It's what, as a scout, you can't teach speed, right? So this kid can flat out fly, which, by the way, Vanetta, there's, or Dr. LaRosa, I hope I'm not being disrespectful. It's just, I guess I got to know you as Vanetta and it just rolls off that way.
That's who I am. That's who I would feel weird if you called me doctor.
But yeah, I think there's a bright future ahead of her son's passion to play. I think in today's recruiting world, it's a little bit you've got to navigate it carefully. There's a lot of barriers with young athletes now coming out. Her son's going to experience that, is experiencing it now compared to 5 years ago. He would have been snatched up, committed, all these things. I think it's really going to happen though for her son. He's got the work ethic, but he can play. So I just wanted to throw that out there. She's not just bragging.
Yes, I concur. I've
really
seen the footage too, so we're on the same page.
But no, I think it is interesting because we don't really tell our stories on who we are, right? When you go meet someone, you don't say, "Hey, I'm Todd Blyleven, former professional player, Major League Scout. Oh, by the way, I was in a mass shooting. I'd like to help people and all these things." Like, it's more, "Hey, I'm Todd." And it's what this show is really going to give us an opportunity to learn. Like next week, and you're going to announce, some of the people we're bringing on. We're going to be able to get into like that person's adversity, like who they really are, and the things that they've done to be able to walk through whatever adversity they have, and the people that have helped them. And it's just really inspirational. So I'm really, again, I think this is a great team. We're going to be able to do some great things together. And Vanetta, thank you for sharing your stories today. And it made me a better, want to be a better dad. I don't know. I'm just like, I'm inspired. So that was cool.
So, and Vanetta, if you could, I might have to get you on the phone with my daughter so you can tell her your story so she could realize it's okay to be with dad. I literally asked her, like, "Honey, you want to go to Kids Bop concert?" And she said, "Can I bring a friend?" And I was like, "No, I just wanted it to be dad and daddy-daughter date." And she looked at me and said, "No, I don't want to go then."
Well, that's the thing.
Going on 18,
Vanetta spent
pest at that age. I was a pest. When I was 16. I was just a pest. So don't think twice about it.
So funny.
Yeah, so funny.
I'm mad at my dad getting snow all over my car when he was nice enough to go clean it off for me and move it. And they were all over the inside of my, and I'm like, the car that he bought for me. This little pest. And it was not even like a day later that I felt so bad about being such a little brat, that I apologized to him, and he laughed it off. And he's, he knew that I was just a teenage brat, just like sometimes with our kids, we have to deal with the moodiness and the craziness and everything else, but
Sure.
part of being a parent, right?
Yeah, well, no, I mean really what I said, and just hearing your stories today, Dr. LaRosa, and most importantly, just your relationship with your father and how much that circumstance impacted you as a person resonated with me. And I sincerely know and hope that it resonates with our listeners. So thank you for making yourself vulnerable, and thank you for walking tall with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It felt good to talk about. Hard, but good. So thank
Good.
you for your support.
Well, it's enough about us, I would say. We've gone about 4 episodes with just the 3 of us, and next week I am just so excited. We've teased a few times here and there about having guests on a weekly basis, and next week that's what we plan to do. So I encourage listeners, please tune in next week when we have our very first guest, Mr. Brian Wood. Brian is an absolute hero, and he has walked tall for Todd during the Route 91 event and after, and he's continuing to do so today. And when I say Brian has seen and done it all in law enforcement, I mean it. He started as a hostage negotiator, then transitioned into an investigative detective investigating such crimes in the narcotics, sexual assault, burglary, and other unimaginable crimes. And on Brian's last assignment, he worked with the FBI on their Joint Terrorism Task Force Division. He's also won many accolades and awards, which we'll hear about. And we are just so excited to have him next week. Brian's going to tell stories of his adversity and his journey of walking tall for himself and his first responders community. So with that being said, we encourage you all to tune in next week. Have a great rest of your week and walk tall.
Walk tall,
Walk
everybody.
tall, everybody. Walk tall.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, The Balance Project. Check them out at www.thebalance-project.org. Thank you so much for being a proud supporter of the Walking Tall movement.